Hello and welcome everyone to our inaugural meeting on Decarbonizing Middle America Strategy Lunch and Learn. I am C.B. Bhattacharya. I'm a professor here at the Katz Graduate School of Business at the University of Pittsburgh. I also have the privilege of directing the Center for Sustainable Business. The Center for Sustainable Business was launched in October 2019. And you know the plot twist that happened soon after that in early 2020. So most of our existence has been during the pandemic. But believe it or not, even though we have spent our nascent existence during the pandemic, because of market demand for sustainability, we are one of the few centers at Pitt to have grown during this time period. We were launched with a grant from the Heinz Endowments. Thank you, Heinz. And by now we have 12 corporate members, and you can see all of their names on our website. We have some of them representing us here today, like CONSOL Energy. We have some in the audience. I saw Claudia Garcia from NL, and likely many more. Based on feedback from our members during this past 18 months, based on feedback from our members, our strategic advisory council, and other stakeholders, we've kind of sharpened our focus a little bit. And so we've basically decided that our overall purpose is to galvanize businesses thrive for all. And what we do is essentially these three work streams: Decarbonize Middle America, which is the inauguration of which is today. Then we have another work stream called Workforce 100, which is essentially that everybody in the workforce, as part of the workforce, needs to be included and treated equitably. So this is our diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative. And then the third work stream that we have defined is ESG Rosetta Stone. As you know, ESG is the talk of the town today, and including at the federal level, we're talking about disclosure requirements for companies to participate in the investment forums and such. So we have a meeting coming up on October 20th and 21st on this ESG Rosetta Stone. That's for our members. And how do we do it? We basically do it through three interrelated streams. One is, of course, we are a university, so education and training is paramount. We are engaged in training our students and managers of companies in sustainability. Applied research, again, there are so many unanswered questions in sustainability that we try to kind of, with the resources of the center, try to answer on behalf of our stakeholders. And most importantly, we are very active in the thought leadership arena. And this is where we have our Sustainable Business Forum, or the SBF, that you see at the intersection of those three Venn diagrams. This is truly the fulcrum that holds everything together. And this is the only part of the center that is members only space, where we discuss topics that are of paramount importance to our members. These topics are voted by members, so it's a pretty democratic setup here. And the last meeting was on diversity, equity, and inclusion. The next one is on ESG Rosetta Stone, and the what and how of ESG. And then we'll see in the future what folks want us to feature. With that said, I want to kind of hand it over to Chris to tell you a little bit more about this particular event and introduce your keynote. Chris.
Thank you, CB. So CB teed up a lot of the focus that we've got. The additional little bit of context that I'd like to add for our conversation today is a little bit of what you, dear audience members, are bringing to the table, and then also a bit of perspective from the market side about what we're seeing out there based on some initial research we've done with our members in the center. So from the audience perspective, there are a lot of different things that everyone is thinking about in these wicked problems in the just transition to a clean and circular economy. Things around energy, education, policy, equity. Lots of things. So I think we're going to have a very rife, good, candid, constructive conversation. That's what I hope the theme for today is. So please do, dear audience members, as you're hearing any of these knowledge fills or ideas or experiences coming across, please do share in via the Q&A function any and all questions that you have. We'd love to hear from that, and we'd love to engage. I know webinar is a little bit harder to do the Q&A from, so please do share that. We will be looking to those and the questions that were submitted in advance. And then just to tee up a little bit from the market perspective, what are some of these wicked problems? Again, we've all seen the IPCC report. We all know that we need to be doing differently, and we need to raise our game, and that there are still some speed bumps along that way, some things that we need to get over. So starting from the point that, hey, many of our members, 73% are already looking at scopes 1 through 3 in at least some way. That's great. There's still a gap to close there in the amount of scopes of each scope that they're looking at and the number of companies looking at it. And not for lack of effort, there's challenges that each is working through, all the way down to the last one of thinking about, okay, we've got 9%, which is a great start, that are thinking about how to help their customers think about the emissions associated with using their services. So again, glad they're doing stuff and illustrating the kind of opportunities, the wicked problems that are still out there. With that framing, I would love to tee it up for our keynote speaker. I am very excited to have Julia from CDP, the organization formerly known as Carbon Disclosure Project, join us. Why? Because she brings a depth and breadth of expertise, not only in supply chains and dealing with investors and just thinking about all of these really complex problems that companies are having to deal with, but she's also, as the associate director, leading the efforts in North America around corporate engagement. So working with companies, responding to CDP, thousands of companies responding to CDP, trying to help them figure out not only, okay, let's disclose in the first place, but then also getting up to best practices along those fronts in their climate efforts and beyond climate. So with that, Julia, we'd love to turn it over to you to frame up our conversation today.
Great. Well, thank you so much for inviting me today. I'm really thrilled to be here to kick off the Decarbonize Middle America workstream. This is such an important topic, not only because, of course, we must urgently transition to a low carbon economy, but because this transformation will require action from every business across the country and the world. In order to achieve our global climate goals, there are two overarching challenges that I am seeing businesses grappling with and that we must solve. How do we decouple emissions from growth? And how do we do it fast enough to avoid the worst impacts of climate change? So I'm really excited to discuss these with you today. But first, before we jump into it, I want to acknowledge that while no one can predict the future, we've already gotten a glimpse into what the future will hold for individual people, for institutions, and for the global economic system, and for our planet. The summer alone, we witnessed devastating wildfires in Turkey and in the Western US, deadly floods in China and Germany, and the beginning of another historic hurricane season here in the US. Extreme weather events are doubly destructive and challenging to address as we're all still grappling with COVID, which has claimed far too many lives. So the science has been telling us for a long time that climate change poses an urgent threat. But with the most recent IPCC report, it really is starting to feel a little different. Global warming can no longer be a distant reality, but something that we have to manage immediately. So reaching 1.5 degrees Celsius, the temperature scientists tell us we must keep global warming at or below, will be difficult, but it's still achievable. We know that solutions exist, the technologies are available, and capital is ready to be allocated, but there are unanswered questions that companies are grappling with. How fast can we decarbonize? How do we transform our business so we can thrive in a net zero world? Today, I want to explore these questions by first looking at rising stakeholder expectations that companies are facing, talking about the challenges around ambitious climate targets, and finally, talking about those wicked problems that companies are facing in achieving these goals. So if you'll go to the next slide. Stakeholder expectations are changing. No longer is climate management just the responsibility of the largest emitters, but rather it's an increasing expectation for all companies to measure and manage their impact. This is directly impacting many organizations across the country that have not been asked to consider this before. So this is a timely discussion for this work stream. CDP has a front row view of these changing demands because we run the global disclosure system for companies, cities, states, and regions to disclose on their environmental performance. CDP was founded 20 years ago to enable institutional investors, including Federated Hermes, who's here with us today, to collect data from large publicly traded companies in order to evaluate environmental impact in their portfolios. But as of 2020, we have seen 10,000 companies, cities, states, and regions disclosing through CDP, including CONSOL Energy, who's here with us today, and 75% of the S&P 500. This growth in disclosure reflects these new stakeholder expectations. The capital markets are broadening the scope of their interest, moving from large publicly traded companies to new types of organizations. For example, in 2020, CDP expanded our annual investor request to allow investors to collect data from fixed income investments, including private companies, universities, hospital networks, and more. Earlier this summer, we announced we would develop a holistic environmental disclosure model for public authorities who run critical systems such as airports, public transport, and wastewater. And then we've also seen a huge expansion in customers requesting environmental data from companies in their supply chain, with 200 customers around the world, including Walmart, Target, Microsoft, AT&T, who are requesting smaller private companies in the US and around the world. So not only are new types of organizations being requested to disclose, but the expectations of these stakeholders are increasing. Stakeholders are now demanding more ambitious climate action across their portfolios and supply chains. So this speaks to that first question that I raised for you that companies are trying to tackle. How can we accelerate our climate action, quickly ramping up to meet these new stakeholder expectations? Traditionally, companies have followed a pathway of improving performance year over year, expanding their emissions measurement, management practices, slowly over time. But now we really need companies to leapfrog, to go from the first time that they're tackling climate, their emissions management, to reducing emissions in line with what's required to keep global temperature rise below a 1.5 degree threshold. So if you'll go to the next slide, we talked a little bit about how there's some unanswered questions about how quickly companies can ramp up their emissions management, but the level of ambition that's required is very clear. We need 1.5C aligned science-based targets, which have emerged as the North Star for companies' environmental goals. To date, over 1,800 companies have committed to set a science-based target, and 780 plus companies have committed to set a 1.5C aligned target. So what is a science-based target? These are emissions reduction targets in line with what's required to keep global temperature rise below a 1.5C degree threshold and put your company on a pathway towards net zero. They're a strategic planning tool, enable companies to model how their organization will operate in a 1.5C world and develop a transition plan to achieve these goals. But setting these targets requires a new way of thinking about climate management, one where emissions management is fully integrated into your business planning. So this raises some technical and strategic challenges for companies when setting these goals. How do we build buy-in to set a target when we don't know how we're going to fully achieve it? How do we embed these targets within the goals and operations of our business units and facilities across the country and around the world? So we've seen some creative solutions to these. For example, NRG, who is committed to reduce emissions by 50% by 2025 and 100% by 2050, spent a year socializing targets internally to build buy-in, traveling around the country to their power plants. But there's more work to be done in this area, as we need the science-based target adoption to expand far beyond these larger early adopters and suffuse throughout every company that needs to tackle their climate impact. A second aspect of establishing science-based targets that has proven to be a challenge for companies is how to tackle their value chain emissions. So CDP research has shown that companies are facing up to $20 billion in costs from environmental risks in their supply chains over the next 5 years. Our data has also shown that supply chain emissions are on average 11.4 times higher than those of their direct operations. So value chains have to be included in the targets that companies are setting. But again, this isn't easy and this is new. How can companies collect granular, high-quality data from suppliers who may not have been asked to measure their emissions impacts before? How can companies integrate emissions management into their business relationship with suppliers so that this is a core part of their expectations around their relationship? This is an aspect of work that all companies are tackling right now through their target setting process. We've seen some great examples of companies tackling this challenge through CDP's supply chain work. We've seen the IT industry, the financial sector, the auto industry come together and request environmental data from shared suppliers and set some expectations for those shared suppliers. We've also seen individual companies develop programs to engage suppliers, like Walmart's Project Gigaton, but there's a long way to go if we're going to drive action at the pace necessary to transition to a 1.5C world. So if we go to the next slide. So we've talked a little bit about the challenges of setting these targets, building buy-in, getting the data you need, building the supplier buy-in for these process. But then the next challenge is you have to achieve it. How are companies going to operationalize these targets so that your business can thrive in a low carbon economy? This is that other wicked challenge that I mentioned of decoupling your business's growth from your emissions so that your business can continue to thrive, so that you continue to empower the communities in which you operate while maintaining within planetary boundaries. So companies, what we know is that companies can't do this through increasing efficiencies alone, although of course this is a vital component. It's going to require renewable energy procurement, product innovation, and investment in low carbon technologies. Again, CDP has seen some exciting examples of companies on this implementation pathway. For example, over 300 companies have committed to RE100, which is a commitment to procure 100% renewable energy by 2050. But achieving this goal will require bringing new renewable resources online and making them increasingly available to companies at every price point and in every location. Product innovation is also at the heart of businesses' climate strategy. For example, Dell, when setting their own science-based target, realized that their monitors were a significant source of emissions. And so their goal reflects this by having a goal to reduce the energy intensity of their product portfolio by 80%. We've also seen hard to decarbonize sectors like agriculture that are taking action this way. So McDonald's has a commitment around reducing 31% of emissions intensity per metric ton of food and packaging by 2030. But achieving these goals is an engineering problem, and it's one that companies are tackling both internally as they try to innovate their products and with their suppliers on an ongoing basis. And finally, not only do companies have to innovate for their own products, but we also need investment in some new low carbon products that will enable the global transition to a net zero world. We need new technology and materials to support this transition and also to remove some of those final tons of CO2 in hard to abate sectors. CDP data has shown that the financial sector sees over $1 trillion in potential revenue from low emissions products and services. So this is a huge area of opportunity for companies who are looking to capitalize on this investment. So this is what we need. We need investments in low carbon materials, manufacturing methods, agricultural practices, carbon capture technologies, which will all be vital for building this 1.5C world that we are working towards. And the last point here is that while we are working to transition our businesses, decouple emissions from growth, and solve these challenges about bringing new technologies and products and renewable resources online, we have to do so while keeping social equity at the center of the work that we're doing. The wave of protests that were spurred by the Black Lives Matter movement has made it clear that environmental action and social equity must go hand in hand. And so we have to achieve these goals in parallel to demonstrate leadership and build the world that we're all working towards. So as you can see, there are a lot of unanswered questions for how companies can, if you can go to the next slide, sorry. There are a lot of unanswered questions for how companies can quickly scale up to ensure we don't exceed 1.5C degrees of warming and transform their businesses to thrive in this new economy. But there are a few things we do know. Building this work requires embracing ambition. To lead on climate, you must set the highest quality targets possible and act on them immediately. Companies must engage and empower suppliers around transparency and sustainable sourcing and consider the complete picture of their climate impacts across their value chain. And companies should also seek opportunities related to the low carbon transition and work to derive revenue from that opportunity so they can make the necessary investments to take advantage of these future opportunities. And finally, throughout this process, companies must provide transparency to their stakeholders who are demanding this transformation by disclosing, ideally through CDP or other platforms. Without disclosure, the environmental movement is blind and we don't have any accountability. Thank you so much, and I look forward to tackling these challenges together.
Brilliant. Thank you, Julia. Much appreciated. So with that, would love to bring in the rest of our panel to have that as much as in real life as we can do these days, live reactions from folks. So teed up one by one, and then and then see if we can get some popcorning going back and forth, some reactions across all of our panelists. So Jacquie, from your experience with CONSOL Energy and coal sector, how did the challenges, the wicked problems that Julia teed up, how does that resonate with what you were seeing in your space and your experiences?
Thanks, Chris. I think the one thing that resonates with me is that, there is this gap to fill, and that although change is needed urgently, that, even when you're looking at sustainable development scenarios, there is this acknowledgement that, technology and innovation are required to achieve the world's aspirational emission reduction goals. And how can we, dedicate the resources to develop these technologies quickly and do it economically?
Right. Brilliant. Thank you, Jacquie. And Jeff, kind of turning to your perspective from experience out in both the natural gas space, but then also more broadly from a utilities perspective, how does that resonate? The kind of challenges that Julia was laying out, how does that resonate with your experience?
Yeah, and again, just echoing Jacquie's comments, there are some significant challenges to moving towards a decarbonized fuel. And so, we are looking at different alternatives, but as a utility, you have governance that has to occur within your company, starting with Pennsylvania PUC has to approve those actions, as well as maybe changes the state law around utility code. So we're exploring all those different options, anything from renewable natural gas through hydrogen, through carbon sequestration. We see all of those things as being, things that some are sooner, some are 5 to 10 years down the road. We want to be part of that discussion. We want to help, lead the efforts as we move into those areas. And we also identified that there are challenges to doing that, not only from, the regulatory and governance, but also from just the pipelines and from people's equipment, customers' equipment. Can they be adapted to a hydrogen economy? Are they capable of doing it now, or do we need significant changes there? So we're looking at all those things, and definitely open to how things could be done better, but also how we can move in a more expedient way towards that future.
Right. So a lot of policy questions to figure out what's the right fit, how does it work? A lot of still technology, safety questions, lots of different things. So to round us out then on that front, Suzanne, we'd love from your perspective from solar, and also from help us zoom up a little bit, from a bigger, broader U.S. Or more than just in the corner of the Pittsburgh area. How does Julia's framing of the challenges ahead, how does that resonate with your experience?
Sure. Well, I think the first thing I think that's relevant is that we are working with corporations every day to help them deploy solar and energy storage in particular, and other software-based solutions to help them integrate with the grid, an increasingly cleaner grid. And they include Fortune 500 companies, right? So they include the Apples and the Targets and the Walmarts of the world, as well as local governments, schools, the federal government. So we are really familiar with how these companies are working to tackle these challenges. And one thing that I would say is that it's best if you can start with the technology that's available today. I agree with Jacquie and Jeff that as we innovate, we need to be as we work to tackle these very big challenges, we need to be investing in innovation. At the same time, there's available technology today, and what we should be focusing on is how we can accelerate the deployment of that existing technology. So we're really focused on doing that with respect to our commercial customers.
An example of that would be we just partnered, and within our own supply chain. So we just partnered with Volvo, for example, to provide electric vehicles for our logistics, where we're shipping products across the country. We have a new partnership with Wallbox, where we can work on deploying EV charging technology in partnership with our own solar and battery storage technology. And those are technologies, again, that are available today. So I think in many ways, it's about how quickly can we really ramp up that deployment with what we have now, while at the same time continuing to invest in innovation. And on the innovation front, in my view, much of that innovation is actually on the software end, because what we can do with the right technology is integrate both utility scale and what we call behind the meter or distributed energy resources to best serve both an individual customer's demand as well as the broader wholesale market. Because we can integrate, we can aggregate, for example, distributed energy resources and ensure that a storage system, for example, that is powered by solar can broadly serve the broad electricity grid at the times when the sun isn't shining, right? So it's that kind of innovation that I think, from my perspective, is the most interesting, combining the existing generation and storage technology with the software to integrate it best with the grid and with other energy technologies like electric vehicles and load management.
Brilliant. Thank you, Suzanne. And I think that tees up brilliantly. Also, Michael, I know that you and I have had a good number of conversations around these transitions. And while we all know that we need to go quickly, we need to go, how do we do it without creating the next generation's set of issues and problems to deal with? So I'd be curious on your take, thinking about Julie's presentation of the wicked problems that lie ahead. How does that resonate with your experience?
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you for Julia, your comments. Really insightful. I think we all recognize how challenging these problems are. From an EO's perspective at Federated Hermes International, we advise over 1.75 trillion worth of assets. Represents over 50 plus institutional investors, which includes pension funds. So sometimes the way I think about it from our responsibility is we're thinking of long-term value creation. So whenever we are engaging with companies on behalf of our clients, what we are looking for is, the transition is really very important to us because we are thinking of retirees 20 years from now, 30 years from now, and how these sort of companies can effectively manage their sort of operations to be able to go through the transition. I think Julia laid a point very well when she mentioned the social issues that you and I have talked about in the past. And if you look at our engagement sort of plan, which is on our website, 2021, 2023, we have all of these issues sort of semantically and also operationally sort of embedded within our approach to our engagement. So when we talk to companies, we recognize that there are challenges. A lot of them, as Julia mentioned, are setting goals and targets, which is really sort of great to see because we need everybody taking action. But our responsibility is to ask some of the questions about, okay, as you do all of these things, how are you thinking about your human capital management? How are you thinking about those social equity issues that are embedded in environmental justice sort of application? And in the same way, you have to think of it, our relationship and our partnership within the Climate Action 100 Plus. A lot of the things that we are doing there brings into sort of the foray, the discussion on just transition, which I think Julia correctly sort of mentioned. And I think a lot of companies, as they look at the science and the action to take, whether it be technology, be policy, it's also the complications of how you take the whole society with you. And from an EO's perspective, but Federated Hermes, we are really thinking on that strategic front. How can companies really bring the right business strategy to impact the operations of the company for the long-term value creation that benefits our clients, which is in many ways largely society.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. Much appreciated. it's always good to have a variety of different perspectives, and I appreciate having finance in here because it's needed. I hear that all the time from different tech folks. It's like, we need to finance this, and knowing that people are coming in at that thoughtfully is good. So now turns to the fun part of the candid conversation amongst the panelists. So if we can bring Alex, we can bring Julia back up into the spotlight as well. Now that everyone has been able to share a little bit of reaction kind of across the board from each of their own perspectives, I'm curious if there's anything that, panelists, if there's something that one of your fellow panelists may have mentioned that resonated a bit with you, or something new that got you thinking and like, oh, hadn't heard that before, that's interesting, or, we think about that. It's glad to see that that's, happening in your space. What reactions do you folks have for each other based on our shared struggles in these wicked problems?
Well, I'll chime in. We think a lot about just transition, so I'm glad that you brought that up or reinforced it, Michael. One thing that I think is important to note is that right now, and I can just speak to it from where is solar and energy storage being deployed in the United States. And while it's true that it is being deployed across the country, when we think about what provides customers the most choice and direct electricity bill savings, it is typically distributed resources, those that are located on site that are typically connected through a policy called net energy metering. And most of where that is occurring right now is actually on the coasts. With a few exceptions, we're starting to see more access to that customer choice and bill savings in the middle of the country. Like, for example, Illinois just has a very strong policy framework. And just yesterday, the governor of Illinois signed this incredible omnibus energy bill, which will ensure that past success continues for many, many years to come. But most of the middle of the country, it's not seeing that level of growth yet that we're seeing on the coasts. And so from my perspective, that's really the place that we need to be focusing on, because we know that actually most of the job growth that's occurring in the solar market, for example, is actually in the distributed sector. So about 75% of all of the solar jobs in the United States are associated with distributed solar. Think about it like on rooftops, right? And that is why it's so important that when we think about how to deploy these systems, that we have more emphasis in the middle of the country, because people that need those bill savings the most are those that are lower income, or people that need those jobs the most are those that are going through this fossil fuel transition, right? And that is not an easy thing. That's really hard. So I just thought those are a couple of thoughts that I have to add to the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Suzanne. Others, let's see, Jacquie, you want to lean on in?
Sure. Excellent points. I think one thing that resonates with me is, from a social perspective, first globally, we can't leave anyone behind. And let's remember that over 800 million people in the world still do not have access to electricity at all. And, so it has to be very widespread. But also from a social perspective, when you're talking about jobs and communities that have so long relied on, traditional heavy industry that does have a carbon footprint, such as coal mining, that it's nearly impossible to wish away these jobs and really great opportunities that companies like CONSOL create for our employees, their families, and we're talking, thousands of people, long sustaining, very high quality jobs with efforts to, impact, directed efforts at our local communities and supporting our school systems. And just flipping a switch is, unlikely. And especially in regions where, Suzanne talked about deploying renewables on the coast and things, there is still this capacity factor question that has to be answered. And there are places where, the technology is not there for renewables to power 100% of the time, no matter what. So there needs to be this reliable, sustainable baseload energy, and it needs to be done responsibly and, locally, in these communities, I think is very important to keep in mind. And also, I think one of the challenges related to, the materials that are needed to support this transition, and that to the extent we can produce these materials in America and, create sustaining jobs, thousands and thousands of jobs for things like concrete and metal and steel and, rare critical minerals that are required, for manufacturing, and looking at alternative uses of our resources. We're very proud of our endeavors to look at coal to products, where we're finding different ways to use coal that in a non-combustible use, and also a circular way. And, I just think you have to kind of look at everything in parallel, and these things just, can't be ignored. So they are huge, huge challenges.
So I probably will jump in very here quickly, and thank you, Jacquie, and also Suzanne. I think one of the two things that I probably would mention would be, the thing that you talked about with just transition when it comes to jobs and potentially, the thousands of people. And again, we can't count them as just people, because if you look at the tree, you're going to think of families, children, and the future of a household. And I think when we start thinking about the transition, we ought to be very much aware of how companies need to be able to support the retraining, obviously guided by also some public policy or engagement strategy as well. And I think that really kind of creates some of those opportunities for us to be able to deal with some of the wicked problems. And I think, Julia, when you began talking, you mentioned something to the effect of all the social uprising issues that are supposed to sort of are happening, and likely will happen as we go through this immense transformation. In many societies, as a lot of these companies are beginning to shift, as we push them to shift, I think all stakeholders, one of the things is we almost have to keep an eye on what happens to the people who work for them, and how are the companies making sure that they have the right skills, or society making sure, and generally every stakeholder is making sure that these employees are actually well equipped to be able to be part, again, not just get jobs, be part of that transition. So for me, the transition is not a discussion about how many goals have been set. It's not just about how many companies are thinking about reaching a 2050 target. It's about how they reach there and have they considered those additional sort of responsibility. And I think another interesting thing that Jacquie, you brought up that to me also raises a fundamental question for all of us. And this is something that we are thinking and is keeping us up at night. Is this clear issue of critical resource materials, right? If you think of rare earth minerals, you're thinking of the different categories of them that go into solar, wind, and all of those different things that are competing with other sort of consumables in terms of hardware technology and even medical sort of technology. You think of the World Bank's publication that they talk about different scenarios in which, if you want to reach a 2 degrees or a 1.5 degrees, we are going to see this, triple-fold or 1,000-fold increase in demand for this particular kind of material. These are all part of the equation, right? And I think, for us at EOS, if you look at our engagement strategy, we are always thinking about, again, back to the long-term value creation. Setting goals, knowing the science is very important because they fit right into the physical risk and there's also the transition risk. But then we have to come back to those wicked questions that we are asking. How are we going to deal with jobs? How are we going to deal with materials? How are we going to deal with community? Those just transition issues that often are center in the aim.
I'd also like to kind of add to the discussion from the standpoint of, the cost of energy, right? We're talking about, jobs, we're talking about, what can we do right now, but also we should talk about the cost of what we provide to our customers and make sure that we understand that as we transition to a decarbonized world, it comes with a cost, right? And as more companies are putting demands on that industry, right? The supply demand equation gets unbalanced, right? And products that, start off, more expensive become much more expensive, right? Because everybody wants that product. And so, we have to balance our expectations with what is the available capacity out there to produce, that renewable product and hopefully balance it with customer demand, right? But also from a social standpoint, we have customers on our gas utility that have trouble paying our gas bill today, which is extremely low in this environment where gas is plentiful, right? So when we introduce, new products which have minimal supply capability and a lot of demand, you're going to really increase prices quite a bit. So I think we have to factor that all in so that we don't leave people behind when it comes to their ability to afford their energy, right?
Yep. I can see that we've teed up a good conversation amongst the panelists, which is good. This was the kind of candid, constructive conversation I was hoping that we would get to. And we're also getting a lot of really good questions in from the audience as well, as I was hoping and expecting, given the crowds of students and entrepreneurs and other innovators that we've got. And so to incent the folks that submitted questions in advance, we'll start with those and then get to the ones that came in live. Yes, recording of the session will be available for later. So we will have that access for folks for being able to share with colleagues. So to start us off, we talked a bit about the wicked problems that each of us are facing in helping our companies in this the just transition to a clean and circular economy. What partnerships have enabled your company to accelerate activities on a circular economy? So is it trade associations that have been helpful? Is it academic partnerships? Is it others, organizations like CTP? What kind of partnerships have been helpful for you all in your transition?
I'll chime in first. I'll try to make it brief to leave time for others. The first thing I would mention is we have a very strong partnership with Total. So speaking of the transition, that's a great example. Total actually invested in our company back in 2011, and they have it was one of basically the first major investment. For those that don't know, Total is a French oil and gas major. They do business all over the world. We were one of the first companies they invested in that was in the clean energy sector, and they have an entirely they have a large group now internally that is called Total New Energy Ventures. And it's totally focused on identifying new companies to invest in to help them as a company transition over time and meet their very aggressive carbon goals, carbon reduction goals. So we're really excited to be working with them. They're a majority shareholder in our company, and I think that that's a great example, right? Like a partner that has really deep knowledge of what it's like to try to make that transition happen. So that's one example. Another example, and I would love to see those similar types of partnerships between clean energy and oil and gas majors and other even smaller companies. More like that, I think, is really important. Another partnership is absolutely, we work with trade associations all the time. It's really important for those associations to represent the broad view of our industry, especially in policy advocacy in particular. So I serve on the executive committee of the board of the Solar Energy Industries Association, for example, but we also work with others like Advanced Energy Economy that has a blend of EV corporate customers and technology providers. And then the last thing I would say is that we partner with other companies quite a bit. I mentioned a couple as in the beginning, but that's really how we evolve are going to be able to evolve and best serve our customers is through both internal innovation as well as acquisitions, business partnerships, and in order to really continue to change along with the marketplace.
Awesome, thank you. Others, what other partnerships have helped you all in your transition?
From the gas company's perspective, we're part of American Gas Association, and they've been great at keeping all of our member companies in the loop on what folks are doing in the renewable space, whether it's hydrogen, renewable gas, what regulatory and legislative matters have occurred, as well as who are developing projects that potentially we could be a part of. So I think trade associations are incredibly important in keeping utilities and other companies abreast of what's going on.
From my perspective, I'll add a couple of thoughts too. Government has been a huge supporter of the things that we're doing. At the local level here in Pennsylvania, I wanted to acknowledge the Pennsylvania Governor's Office of Energy and the Department of Community and Economic Development for their efforts to, bring corporations and NGOs and community leaders together to look at, how can we create a carbon capture and storage hub here in Southwest Pennsylvania, and who's going to anchor this hub, and how do we make that happen? Also in West Virginia, the Economic Development Corporation, who are keenly aware and understand these challenges and the impacts on communities, and also looking at ways to repurpose former legacy, mining and steel and different manufacturing sites that are brownfields. How can we repurpose them for renewables or different types of manufacturing jobs? So I wanted to definitely acknowledge the local and state governments, and also National Energy Technology Laboratory and the Department of Energy, who has also been critical in helping us. The Office of Fossil Energy is now Carbon Management, and I think they've been very helpful in kind of leading those efforts and looking at things alternatively. And then I also wanted to acknowledge some of the smaller startup companies who have really developed some innovative tools. One of our projects, we're working with a company called Carbon Solutions, and one of their mapping tools. So they're looking for opportunities, for CCS, but one of their tools that we're going to actively be using, allows us to look at environmental justice, from a modeling perspective, and allows us to identify what opportunities, what areas can we avoid in operations and impacts, so that we can, protect these communities. So I think there's a lot going on. And I also wrote down, I wanted to acknowledge, certain NGOs, like the Clean Air Task Force has been, very, very helpful and constructive dialogue in terms of looking at, what do these policies realistically look like, and how can we work together? So it's just a very holistic group of people. I think a lot of mind power and getting everyone together and aligned is really what's needed.
From my perspective, thank you, Jacquie. I actually like some of the snippets of what is happening with government entities and public policy. From an investor perspective, which, as active owners, that's what EOS is, our responsibility. We are active owners. We, part of the CA 100 class sort of groups trying to really advance and engage in a boardroom and management on different actions and hold a certain level of accountability to a lot of these entities. One of the things that I actually find very exciting about the way we engage with companies, when we talk to board of directors of companies and also talk to management, we often sometimes coming in as investor groups, right? Kind of climbing around common objectives and different collaborative efforts to make sure that at least each company feels that all investors are sort of aligned, even not to some level, on some specific set of issues. Recently, I think an interesting thing that one of my colleagues, EOS, but was represented EOS, was the Enacting Purpose, which was published, a second part of it was published recently, where we encourage companies to really think about not just one part of the stakeholder map, but broadly all the different stakeholders that they sort of want to sort of work with, and make sure that each of them, your voice is represented. So definitely excited to see that each of the companies that are represented here are talking to multiple stakeholders, which is very encouraging for me as an active owner to sort of hear that they're looking beyond just, the periphery of, or what, when I used to be in the construction engineering space, where we talk about just looking beyond the fence line, right, which is very, very important to sort of the way we move forward into the future. So definitely exciting to see that. And this is what we are doing in our space as active owners, and to sort of collaborate together, come up like, the PRI and all those different platforms that exist for those collaborative engagements.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. And we've got a number of more questions coming in. We'll be respectful of folks' lunch hour. So I'll try and combine these, and we'll see if we, as a panel, if we can keep our responses tighter. So have one that came in, how do we use, and this is something that Julia teed up a little bit, how do we use this opportunity to supercharge the region's economy?
Well, I thought that Jacqueline teed it up pretty well. I mean, from my perspective, what you need to be thinking about is the various components of that transition, right? Part of it is about new technology and research and innovation, because that's an area of investment. Part of it is the jobs associated with project construction and deployment. Those are where the majority of the jobs are going to come from. And it is important that they are well-paying jobs with good benefits and will last for the long term. No question about that. And notably bringing in the workforce that is either going through this transition and treating them well along the way, right? I totally agree with what Jacquie said. Like, this is not going to happen for people that have been working in coal on either at a coal plant or any kind of fossil fuel plant, or in a mining job. It's not going to happen overnight, and they need to be treated really, really well with that transition. It's so important. I could not agree with that more. And then the third part of it is the manufacturing side. And if we can do more of that in the United States, we not only will be better off from an economic perspective, but actually from an environmental perspective, and a labor sustainability perspective. One thing, you talked about business partnerships earlier, Chris, but I was remiss that I didn't mention the fact that another business partnership that's been critical to our success and our sustainability is our partnership with Maxeon, which is our exclusive module panel provider. And they have been, the products they use are very firmly not utilizing any poly from regions where there is any kind of risk of forced labor. And we've been extremely proactive as a company on that, because it is a legitimate concern, right? This is not about just where does fossil fuel come from? There are other critical components to new technologies, and we need to be really mindful and not make the mistakes that we have made in the past just because it's a new technology. So anyway, I would say R&D, deployment of projects, and manufacturing are really sort of the key areas needed to supersize that transition.
Awesome. And to the audience, do treat that as a teaser. We've heard a lot of interest in increasing the Pittsburgh region's activities in being a hub for the clean economy. So look forward to more conversations on that front. But I saw a couple of panelists leaning in. I know, Julia, you look like you wanted to chime in on the supercharge question.
Well, I think the main thing that I would add is that there's a lot of capital available to companies that are positioning themselves in a way to transform their businesses for the clean economy. Because I think investors, as Michael was mentioning, are looking at these long-term risks, trying to transform their own portfolios to mitigate those risks and ensure that they're going to continue to be successful in the long term. And I will add to that, of course, this is also an important aspect for ensuring the sort of strength of companies on the ground and supporting the communities that they do, is to continue to be able to operate successfully in this low carbon economy. So I think that the one thing that I can see as an opportunity for companies to take advantage of this is, as we were just talking about, is sort of thinking about from a strategic perspective where those sort of low carbon products, low carbon investments opportunities are, so that they can position themselves well and sort of show this transformation is underway and take advantage of this momentum that's available in the capital markets as well.
Chris, I probably, thank you, Julia. I probably will add this, and sometimes, and I'm going to say this from, I think you and Stevie probably know, I have a little bit of academic background, so I'll kind of infuse that sort of little bit of science in that. And often it's very depressing when you look at any climate model, and then you look at the pace of technology penetration, right? It's almost like a lot of climate models do not really capture the real time and often the fast pace of technology, as Suzanne was just talking about, in different sort of tiers. But I think one of the things that we have to recognize from a capital perspective is that there is a process to this. And if you're going to supercharge, like, let's say, Middle America, to sort of really move at a faster rate, we have to see companies really engaging on the policy side to influence that sort of fast-paced transition. And why do I say this? Sometimes you find companies say one thing externally, and even try not to, especially some of the big companies, right? And not necessarily try to sort of lead the public discussion into that space. I think more active engagement within the public discussion, because we know in this just transition, it's not just going to be the companies. I mean, as active owners, we recognize that. We know where the restrictions and the restraints come from, but we ought to see them engaging in that space and not trying to fault the pace at which these transitions will come. We know there will be business interruptions, but that's the more reason why when you look at different materiality of these companies, we stress on that business model transformation, because we want these businesses as owners to really have a future, because our investors are invested in them for the long term. And so that combination of living up to the truth of your sort of ethos of the future is essential. And that includes those public sort of policy engagement to ensure that there is enough incentives, there is enough alignment from the political sort of side to grow and increase at a faster pace than we would probably see now.
Yeah. So I realize that we are now in our buffer time for what we had set aside for the panel. Want to be respectful that we don't take too much longer to wrap these up, but we have a lot of really great questions have come in, so I want to be respectful for the folks that did take the time to submit the questions. So we got two in here. It looks like that, Suzanne, that you flagged that might be of interest for you, and I would love for others to pile on as interested. And first one, so net metering raises thorny problems for firms to engage in and engage in the policy work, and perception around resistance, where and where that resistance is coming from. What can companies do to address net metering and just kind of advance the policy conversations?
So for those that are not familiar, net energy metering is essentially a policy tool that's available in most states across the United States, including in Pennsylvania, that allows for an individual customer to install a solar or energy storage system on their site, whether it's a home or a business or a nonprofit, and do one primary thing, which is when there's extra power being generated by that facility that's on site, that system on site, they can provide it back to the grid and get a credit on their bill for that extra power. We call it net excess energy. So there's a lot of other parameters related to net energy metering, but that's the core thing, is that customer that has anything extra beyond their on-site demand gets a credit on their bill. And it's a critical policy to allow for customer choice with respect to distributed energy resources. And it is true, I saw the question that most of the time utilities are posing challenges to the availability and accessibility of that policy. Sometimes it's through rate design, and sometimes it's through proceedings that directly are related to net energy metering. It is something where a lot of our time, our policy resources time, and the trade associations, et cetera, are spent on defending net energy metering to ensure that customers can continue to have that choice, and that the price of the power that they get on their bill, that credit value, does fairly reflect the value that is providing to the broader grid as a whole. And that's that is going to continue. I don't expect it to go away anytime soon. And unfortunately, in our experience, many times the utilities are opposed to it or presenting challenges to it because they see it as a competitive risk to their business. And our preference would be instead for utilities to work with us and our customers to develop solutions together.
So definitely an area for opportunity to figure out the more ideal policy solutions. Again, open for others who may want to dogpile in on that one, but not seeing anyone hyping up the mic immediately. Had one or three other questions in here. Again, Suzanne, I saw that you might want to take a stab at one of these. But to trade it up a little bit, see first for one of the other ones, what you're thinking about for Julia, who do you see these investors that we've been talking about, right? Who are these investors and how do they view and mitigate risk?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, CDP works with about 590 institutional investors. And so these are some of the largest asset managers in the world, including companies like BlackRock, Goldman Sachs, et cetera, who request environmental data through CDP. CDP data then also goes into Bloomberg terminals. It goes into other investment research firms. So it sort of gets further disseminated through the ESG landscape. And so all of these investors that are touching this information are using it in different ways. There's a few that are, creating indices or investment products based on it. Others are using it for direct company engagement. Trying to really dig into the details of companies' transition plans and pieces like that. And then the last thing I'll say is that, increasingly there's also the expectation for financial institutions themselves to be managing the emissions within their portfolios. So ensuring that their portfolios are aligned with this 1.5 C degree world. So increasingly investors are using the data that they are collecting from companies to understand their own portfolio emissions profile and, work with the companies in those portfolios to align with these climate scenarios. So there's a lot of different information. I'll throw some maybe links in the chat just for further research. There's a wide range of how investors are starting to evaluate this type of risk.
Awesome. Michael, I don't know if there's any further perspective on your side about how folks are looking at which type of investors you're seeing step into these conversations with you and how they're looking at risk.
No, thank you. I think Julia laid it correctly. I sit on the engagement side, so I get to dig deeper into these issues and talk to sort of board members and management about exactly the things that Julia just mentioned. And I think, from the likes of the BlackRock to us and everybody who is involved in this on this side, creating portfolios that represent these sort of, I often use the term ideals, but they're really not ideals anymore. They represent a very measurable part of any return that any investment community investor is really looking for. I think some of the times we talk about alpha, when it comes to portfolio and the returns that you're looking for. And we've demonstrated from a Federated Hermes international sort of funds perspective that you could really have good alpha when it comes to investment returns. And I think in general, one of the misconceptions out there when it comes to the work that we do and how we do it is that we often don't understand the issues properly. When we get good amount of data from the CDPs, the MSCIs, and all those different combinations, our work is to sit down with management and ask those tough questions. How are you thinking about the transition? Why do you have this set of goals? Have you designed these programs this way? Because it goes back into our own unique set of data structures to determine where we invest and where we don't invest as well, and some of our sort of different restrictions that we put on where to invest as well. So I think one of the things that people should note about when it comes to investors, that investors are really very much aware of their own portfolio. I mean, there's growing knowledge and exercises around different methods and approaches to make sure that portfolio represents the ethos that we kind of preach, especially from a firm like ours. But we are also on that sort of front, engaging companies that we invest, especially publicly traded companies. But I think Julia mentioned earlier, there's also the fixed income and all of those different groups of entities that are being pulled together in that sort of formula as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Michael. And great apropos points for, I know Jacquie is going to get a deep dive in that, but also any of our other members for the Sustainable Business Forum coming up in October 2021. We will be looking a lot at the what and how of ESG disclosure and having some perspectives from the finance side for that. So look forward to, if you're in that group or want to be in that group, more conversations there, and we'll see what we can share out publicly from that. There are just a few questions left. See if we can power through these. Let folks get back to their day. Appreciate everyone who has stuck on through now. So there's one on here around electrification. And so this might be something that a few folks could be interested to touch on. So what do you believe that what role do you believe that electrification has in the transition to a clean energy future? How do we ensure that disadvantaged communities are not left behind? So I'm sure that each member of the panel might be able to chime in a bit on this. We were just talking about from the utilities perspective. So I don't know, Jeff, if you want to start us off thinking about how to leave no one behind, making sure that folks get access to utilities.
Yeah, and so we have programs to support folks that can't afford their bills. And so those programs have been expanded, and we work very closely with electric utilities so that if they're having problems with their gas bills, we connect them with the right resources so that across their whole energy chain, they have, the right support structure to make sure that they can afford their bills and pay their bills. But also, as we transition to a decarbonized economy, we need to look at what other things are out there to help support, that transition, because beyond just the energy bills themselves, it's converting their appliances in their homes, right? To some type of either alternative energy source, whether it be the fuel or whether it be how it's powered. So how do you get those resources into customers' hands? And so utilities have undertaken areas where it's called energy efficiency and conservation programs, where with the permission of the Public Utility Commission, utilities can offer, anything from, subsidies to loans to whatever it takes to get that conversion to take place. So it's been prevalent on the electric side. It's starting to get a little bit of momentum on the gas side, but definitely things are occurring in that space to help support, energy transition.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. Jacquie, you want to chime in on that one? Nope. Okay. Got it. All right. Well, I saw that we got whittled down to, I think, our last ones here. There was one, Suzanne, that looked like you had an interest in. So tee that one up for you. So thinking about affordable technologies to looks like mostly on the heating side. So replace diesel fire water pumps, dependable displacement of emergency diesel generators, or more, I guess, the diesel fronts, and most economical electric space heating technologies. So I think the hard to emergency, like when you need it, how do you do it so it's not dirty?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing I will say is that distributed solar paired with battery storage is the best technology available on the market today to compete with diesel generators. That said, it is more expensive. And the storage market today is kind of where the solar market was about 10 years ago. So we've seen really dramatic declines in pricing, both mainly on the what we call the balance of system front, which is the components, and especially the modules. But we've seen really dramatic declines, and that's actually because of this ramp up of the scale of manufacturing internationally. We're seeing the same thing now with battery storage, where we're getting to that scale of ramp, but we're not quite there yet. And so we're still not, it's still more expensive really than it should be. It is to be very blunt about it. So a lot of the key thing that is a lot of the policy tools that are critical in order to ensure that people are deploying solar and storage instead of diesel generators as backup solutions in the case of outages, which is unfortunately becoming all too frequent, whether it's a wildfire in the West or an ice storm in Texas or a flooding in Louisiana, right? I mean, we will see that, continue to see that, unfortunately, across the country. And we know that there's really great resiliency solutions that are clean. The key thing is getting those prices to decline. And so storage-focused incentives and continuation of policies like net energy metering are the key ways in order to get there. And the reason why I bring that up in terms of those incentives is because in places like California and in other markets, the customers that are higher income, they're willing to pay for it, for that peace of mind. We see that in our sales, but that's not most of the country, right? We need to make sure that this technology is accessible and affordable to everybody. And those incentives are really critical in bringing the near-term costs down and also getting the technology to scale so that as a whole, the cost of the entire technology chain continues on the decline.
Awesome. Thanks, Suzanne. And I know that that's also a space that we talked about with solar. There's a lot of software innovation probably for storage and other types of opportunities for innovators and entrepreneurs to play roles in there as well to help bring that cost curve down. So very excited to see what comes out of the Pittsburgh region from that. Unless anyone has any other additional burgeoning question or thoughts on that last one, I'll bring us to our last question from the panel, which I think would be a good one for us to leave on. How does Middle America look like to your business in 2050?
It's a tough question, Chris. It is. I think that's why everybody is quiet. But I felt the edge to sort of respond because, again, going back to what I said earlier on, for many of our investors, the pension funds and institutional investors, especially, we use the term sometimes retirees. When I start thinking of Middle America, I think of those people, right? I think of what those funds represent and how and what kind of value can we create for them by then, right? And that brings me back to how responsible businesses can be and in terms of climate action and also the innovations that we sort of kind of go through. And I think one of the exciting things about our conversation is we've been very honest. When Suzanne was talking, she's talking about technology, and I think you referenced to how the pace of technology is changing. One of my biggest sort of appeal is I want to see a Middle America in 2050, where Julia said, and I believe Jacquie also mentioned it, where no one is left behind. And that is a political statement to make because that's an idealistic thing to say, but it's also almost the thing that we have to aspire for as a society. We know there's going to be the haves and the have-nots, the inequities exist, whether with climate or not, is happening before. But the way we have to think of the Middle America tomorrow, when I talk about tomorrow, 2050, which is literally right in the corner, because none of us thought 2030 will be coming here soon. When we're talking about the SDGs a few years ago, well, literally, we are up, against the clock with a lot of these things. So even 2050 is just right here, in my perspective. So I want to see that Middle America. And I think from our business model perspective, and I encourage people to go to our website, look at our engagement priorities, and you see an engagement strategy. The issues of climate change, labor, rights, and all of those things are things that we want to see better output and outcomes from business practices, which is why our clients are really invested in our engagement and paying for our services to make sure that we become active owners in the way we talk to companies about it. So, I'm just teeing up for everybody to sort of speak their mind on this sort of very complex, but I think challenging issue. But that is my, my personal vision, and I hope, my company, our personal sort of our group vision of a future, because we have people who are counting on us to make sure that the long-term value is there for them and their kids in the future.
I'll add to that, from CONSOL's perspective, we're an iconic American company, and there are so many other iconic American companies that have been around since the Civil War. And I would like to see these, iconic manufacturing, the companies who built America, I would like to see them in 2050, evolved. I would like to see the technologies, developed at full scale. And I'd like to see companies like CONSOL and others, evolve and change and kind of lead the sustainable transformation of these businesses, which I think are just so critical to, America's economy and families and jobs. I'll also say, I'll plug the Rosetta Stone portion of the CSV a little bit. And Chris knows, he's heard me say this, for those of us publicly traded companies, there's a lot of concern with, making statements and aspirations that you can't necessarily back up. And, so looking too far into the future is tough, and there are restrictions, there as well. And I'm looking forward to hearing everyone's insight at the next CSB forum, so we can talk about, how do you make these predictions and what's appropriate and legal. So.
Yeah, I would like to add, I completely agree with Jacquie's point. And I think it's, we're really excited about watching businesses transform and sort of how they're going to continue to succeed in while sort of in this net zero world that we're all hoping to build by 2050. So I think that's the sort of 2050 that I'm hoping that we'll achieve, is a world where we have achieved our net zero goals, where we're not emitting more carbon, we're not emitting, excess carbon into the atmosphere. And it takes a lot of interim work between now and then to get there, which is why, setting these interim targets is so important to ensure that we're on track. Because as Michael said, it's not that far away, but it's in the purposes of business planning, it's too far to wait to take action for 2050. So yeah, I think seeing so much momentum from companies who are all aiming in the same direction with the same goal in mind of this net zero world by 2050. I'm seeing so many companies innovating in terms of the technologies and the investments and taking advantage of existing technologies, which I think Suzanne made a really great point on earlier. I'm hopeful that we'll get there, but certainly have a long ways to go to achieve it.
The only thing I would add is that I just think there's an incredible opportunity in front of us to serve Middle America with these technologies and to work to get toward that transition fast, both in terms of, again, as we've talked about, ensuring that there's the right kinds of, frankly, direct payments to people that are going to need that help as we go through that transition. Same thing on the company side. I don't think we should be unrealistic about that need. And I brought up Illinois earlier, but that's an example where that bill that was passed includes all these things for clean energy, which is great, but it also has really specific provisions associated with the coal plant that is going to need to deal with that transition. And they're not just the facility owner, but the employees that work there. So my view is that we can get there, but it does require a lot of investment both on the clean energy and battery storage side, as well as on the fossil side, to get there. And there's just so much opportunity. We, in our industry, think of all of the, 50, there's like 20 states where there's a lot of deployment of solar and storage. And then there's like the rest, and we call it the long tail. That's probably not the best way to think about it, but that's actually where the bulk of the growth opportunity lies, is Middle America.
Awesome. Jeff, you want to bring us home with what 2050 looks like?
Sure. From our perspective, technology is going to continue to improve and become more affordable. And with affordable energy through new technology, Middle American can be included. It's just a matter of some of these technologies are at the early stage, and as it gets more prolific, and more people are manufacturing the product and the product becomes more available in the demand, prices will come down and affordability will be there. So we see that also in the long-term, view of the world. It's just a matter of, trying to help it get there, and how can the utility be a part of that equation?
Awesome. Well, on that note, lots of good ideas, lots of good visions to work towards, and lots of questions. I know Danny, Stevie, and I will be working to try and extract some of the wicked problems that got teed up in our conversation today. We'll share those out with the group after as part of our outtake from the conversation. Hopefully that spurs more partnerships, more innovation, more research, and more forward movement on this front. So thank you everyone in the audience who stayed. I think we got around to north of 40 people on at the height of it. And we kept most of that even now past what I would have sanely thought of as the lunch hour. So this is way more than I would have wanted to for a normal conversation. 60 minutes is a long time for me for a long conversation. So I appreciate everyone sticking around. And we will endeavor to keep the conversations as lively as helpful. And I will commit to trying to make them even more time respectful of folks' days. So thank you to the panel. Thank you everyone for sticking around, and we will catch you all later. Thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.